Hello, everyone. I just have to say I'm so honored to be in such amazing companies, not only the speakers and award recipient, but also just each and every one of you. Not only have many of you paved the way for me even being here today, but you continue to pave the way in your ongoing devotion to really having these important conversations. And they are important conversations because when I think about reproductive rights, of course, I'm thinking about the right to choose and the right to control, for women to control what happens to their own body, but it's also about the right to information and the right to be able to be given information without judgment and without bias so that we can make those informed decisions. And we don't only do that as a community and as healthcare providers, but we do that as parents as well and as role models, as you were hearing, because it's not only the influence that you have over your children, but your children's friends and your community of other parents. So this is, in my mind, an ongoing and important global effort. And I'll just tell you some more. You've heard some statistics. And in fact, I'll start with a little anecdote. You were hearing about the TORCH program and also about the program for teens to then educate doctors about how to talk to kids about sex, how to even ask the questions, because most of us sitting in this room, I was one of the ones, by the way, who had a cushy birth, but I also had parents, thankfully, in fact, my dad's here, wave dad. I had parents who were very open and honest and natural with me about sexuality, but most of us weren't lucky enough to be raised in homes like that, including doctors. So when doctors go through medical school training, they are sorely undereducated and underprepared to talk to grown-ups about sex, much less kids. And I've been working as a sex educator and therapist for over 20 years, and I actually did my training here in the city in New York, at New York University. And I remember I was working, not long after I was completing the bulk of my training, I was working as a sex educator and as, in fact, a peer educator training specialist. And I remember there was this one doctor that I just was really struggling with, and finally there was this aha moment he had because he was so uncomfortable talking to the kids about sex, and he was doing the HIV testing and the risk assessments. And so he had asked a girl, are you sexually active? And she said no. And so he did all the testing. It turns out that she had numerous STDs, had been in fact having sex. And he said, well, why did you tell me you weren't sexually active? And she said, because I wasn't on top. I wasn't active. You see? So just warming you guys up. You ready? But it's a true story, and it makes a really important point, because if anyone needs to be specific and explicit, it's our medical community. So I'm so thrilled about that piece of the program. Not only peer education is so important for the reasons that you heard, but also because as anyone who knows a teenager or even remembers being a teenager, they are infallible and immortal, and the only thing they want and the only ones they will listen to are their peers. So to be able to harness that energy and use that for good rather than evil is a very good thing that I fully support. Now, just today, 10,000 American teens are going to contract a sexually transmitted disease. That's what happens in this country every single day. And when we look at the 19 million annual STD diagnoses that happen in this country, teenagers make up over half of those diagnoses. 4 in 10 girls will get pregnant by age 20 in this country, as the statistics are now. And 47% of teens who have experienced any sexual activity say that they did something that they didn't really want to do. So what's so important about the sex and health education happening through the TORCH program, through the Institute, is that they are not only talking about, we've heard comprehensive sex education. I just want to take a minute to talk about even what that is. There is abstinence-only education, and there is abstinence-based education. So the only kind of safe sex is no sex, right? That's the only kind of sex that's going to really be foolproof when it comes to preventing sexually transmitted diseases. But unfortunately, as you've been hearing, that's not the reality for our teenagers. So when we talk about comprehensive or abstinence-based education, The children or teenagers are taught not only about the risks of sex and that the only safe sex is no sex, but they are also taught about sexually transmitted diseases, pregnancy, and the prevention of both, and how you prevent both. And it's not just about talking about birth control and condoms. It's talking about how do you negotiate for condom use. When you're in some sexual scenario and the boy says, if you really loved me, you wouldn't use a condom, or the girl says, I hate them, I hate the way they feel, how do you, as a 16-year-old, navigate that, negotiate that? Who's taught you how to troubleshoot those things? So that's something that we have to do not only as a community, but also it's some of the great work that this organization is doing and that I hope that you all will continue to support. You know, in my office, I'm not only an educator, I'm a therapist, and I've seen many couples and many individuals, and I always say when I talk to groups of parents about how to raise sexually healthy kids, I talk about how I, in my office every day, now primarily working with adults, see the effects of the problems that we can stop today with our teenagers, whether it's the woman that has been in abusive relationship because she sees herself as damaged goods ever since she contracted an STD when she was 18 years old, to the woman who carries around such intense shame because of the experience she had in college when she, like the story, I mean, almost identical to the story that you heard, that of the woman seeking counseling and information about her reproductive rights and instead being met with shame and misinformation and bias and judgment. And that doesn't just obviously impact that young woman in terms of the reproductive choices she's going to make, but it impacts how she feels about herself, how she feels about her body, her self-esteem, her self-worth, and what she carries forward in all of her decision-making. So, you know, to me, this whole movement and this organization is not only about protecting our children and making sure that they're making the wise decisions, but for me, it's also about celebrating the gift that your body is and raising our children to feel a sense of agency and control over their bodies and what happens to them. And that's where the comprehensive sex education is so important and how we as a community can make a difference. Now, I, in fact, had to fight my publisher to write the book and to publish the book, Talking to Your Kids About Sex. They were like, I don't know. I don't think there's going to be a big market for that. And, you know, what I have loved is not only has there been a market, of course, but what I've loved is all the stories that I've heard from parents about how meaningful it is to have a guide. And of course, my book isn't the only guide, but we need a guide. Most of us, as I said, weren't raised in an environment where we even knew how to have these conversations. And so one of the things I tell parents when you're thinking about how can I be the best sex educator I can for my children, it's not only by being a role model and letting your daughters and your sons, by the way, know about the work that you're doing to support these kinds of initiatives, but it's also about getting really clear on what your own values are. I mean, parents always you can see their gulp when I say this to them, but if you want to think about how to educate your children, first and foremost, you have to get really clear in your own mind, ask yourself the question, what is the ideal scenario under which I can imagine I want my child to have sex for the first time, right? Because that's when you start to get really clear. Everybody with a kid, think that now and don't faint in despair, but think about it, because that then becomes your values context. And part of the reproductive rights as I see them, it's our individual rights as individual men and women and also as parents to make that choice. What are the family values that I want to impart to my children around sexuality? That I have a sense of pride in my body, that I have a sense of, and you know, this is what I want my child to say, I have a sense of pride in my body, I have a sense of control over my body, I know the names of my body parts, and I use the correct terminology, people, about my genitals. I don't call them woo-woos or hoo-hoos, I use the correct terms. And I did some training with Oprah. She no longer calls it a vajayjay. I'm very excited about that. But, you know, we have to be able to teach them to feel, from a very early age, to feel good about themselves and to not feel shame and embarrassment, even if it means that we have to get over our own. Because what we have found is that not only does abstinence-only education not work, it may slightly delay the age at which children have sex for the first time, not by much, but those who have only received abstinence-only education are significantly less likely to use condoms or safer sex practices because they haven't had the information. So in the end, they're just as likely to engage in the risky behaviors, but significantly less likely to be prepared. And so that's why it's so important that we, and that you as a community not only advocate for abstinence-based versus abstinence-only education, which is really the only education that's allowed or funded presently in the public school system, but that we fill in the blanks as a community and also as individual parents. So I wanted to talk, how are we doing on time? By the way, your kids, the internet can be a source for amazing gains, as you've heard. You can tweet. I'm learning about tweeting and twerping and Facebooking myself over the past several years. But you also have to think about the internet in terms of the damage that it can do, because kids are seeking information about sexuality and sexual health on the internet, and half of the websites that provide medical information, including around sexuality, are incorrect, providing incorrect information or biased information. So it's not only about, if you are a parent or if you educate parents, making sure they know you have to keep that technology in a centralized location. You have to teach your children about the internet predators and about the fact that when they Google whatever and look for images, they're likely to find images that they don't necessarily want to see. I'll never forget the 5th grader who told me, because I still develop sex education programs for school and often like to go in there. And this 5th grader said to me that he had been wanting to do a report on the White House for school. And so he looked up whitehouse.com. And turns out that's a porn site. It's just so you know, it's whitehouse.org. So whether they actually seek it out or not, children are being exposed to all sorts of information, misinformation, and images and ideas that we as parents don't want them to have. So really educating yourself as parents and as community leaders about what they are seeing, what's out there, and talking to your children about it, and having, as my title in the book is called, an ongoing conversation, because it's not a birds and a bees talk. It's not one talk. It's an ongoing conversation. You say, and just keep this in mind, giving you just a very quick synopsis of developmentally what you should be covering. By the time a child, since so many girls are now getting their periods as early as 9 years old, around 8, 9, you have to be able to talk to your children about the changes that come with adolescence in their bodies and emotionally for both genders. Around 10, 11, you're talking to them about the mechanics of baby making, which, by the way, when you're describing it to them, they are not imagining in their heads what you're imagining as you explain it to them. It's more like a physics geometry image in their mind. Point A fits into point B, and so, and then as they get, but I could tell an 11-year-old about the mechanics of baby making and have exactly the same words come out of my mouth with a 14-year-old. And the 14-year-old would hear it completely differently than the 11-year-old would. So it's not only having an ongoing conversation, but repeating the conversation again and again and again, so that your children, as they develop and go through those developmental stages, can process it in an age-appropriate way. And then by the time they're like 12 or 13, you should be talking to them about pregnancy and STD prevention. And as they move into 13 and 14, you're talking to them about those larger social issues around negotiating for condom use and pressure around having sex. There's another study that found that 80% of girls' first sexual experiences, while not forced, were because of pressure. He's gonna leave me if I don't have sex with him. There's another girl in my class who will, or if I really loved him, I would. And the thing to remember is that children until age 21 don't have a fully formed prefrontal cortex. That's the CEO of the brain that makes decisions and weighs consequences. None of us are surprised to hear that most teenagers don't have this intact, but it's actually kind of comforting to know there's a biological reason. And so that means that we have to help them through the process of not only understanding how to protect themselves, but understanding the consequences. So I guess, well, I'm running out of time, but that's all I have to say. I think that for all of this, it's the work done here and elsewhere, what you as individuals and as a community can do to not only protect children, but empower them, So we've had amazing initiatives here, and Gloria Steinem was just here, obviously, who was at the forefront of the women's movement, but I always like to say, and maybe you'll agree with me, maybe you won't, that once we're fully entitled to information about our sexual health, once women can celebrate their bodies and the gift that their sexuality is and honor that and celebrate that as well as protect it, I think that's when we'll see a woman in the White House. So thank you for that.